Her daughter left a voicemail on Christmas Eve. "There's just no room this year, Mom." Elaine Carter, retired nurse and widow, didn't call back. She watched the family party happen without her. On her furniture, with her money, in a house she once helped them buy. By New Year's Day, their names were erased from her will, her power of attorney, and every account they'd quietly assumed she'd forget to check. They left her out for convenience. Now, every legal document she signed made sure they'd stay out. For good. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The voicemail came just after noon, clipped and polite. "Hey, Mom. So, this year's kind of tight. We've got Brian's parents, his sister's family, and the kids wanted to invite some friends. There's just no room this year, Mom. But we'll call, okay?" Elaine replayed it twice, though the words didn't change. The kitchen clock ticked behind her like a slow heartbeat. She pressed her phone flat on the table and stared at the faint ring of coffee it left on the wood. Outside, snow drifted past the window in lazy spirals, collecting on the mailbox that still bore her late husband's name. For a long time, she didn't move. The refrigerator hummed to life, a low, steady sound that filled the silence Janet's voice had left behind. Elaine finally stood, wrapped her cardigan tighter, and crossed to the window. Across the street, the Collins house glowed in soft gold light. A tree shimmered in their front window, every branch dusted with ornaments. She could almost hear laughter spilling from behind the glass. Her own kitchen light flickered once. She reached for the dimmer switch and turned it lower until the room looked like dusk had settled inside. She sat again, scrolling through her phone, and there it was, the first post. Janet had uploaded an album titled Christmas Eve Magic. 14 people smiled around a long, candlelit table. A roast glistened in the center, steam rising. A matching set of gold-rimmed plates, folded napkins, champagne flutes catching the flash. And in the corner of the frame, just behind Brian's mother, Elaine spotted something that made her chest ache. Her chair. The same oak dining chair she'd given Janet years ago when the young couple bought their house. The seat she'd polished every Thanksgiving. Tonight, it sat pushed against the wall, draped with purses and a red coat. She zoomed in, thumb trembling slightly. A caption sparkled beneath the photo. "So grateful for family this year. Home for the holidays, Chot's full house." Elaine stared until her eyes burned. Then she locked her phone, placed it face down, and went to the freezer. She found a single frozen turkey dinner, the kind she used to keep for nights when her husband worked late at the hospital. She slit the plastic film, slid it into the microwave, and pressed start. The save machine whirred to life, its mechanical hum too bright, too present. The scent of instant gravy filled the air. She set out one plate, one fork, one folded paper napkin. The timer beeped. 3 short notes that echoed in the quiet. She carried the plate to the table and sat, her reflection faint in the window beside her. Snow gathered in soft piles on the railing outside. Down the block, laughter drifted faintly from another home. Elaine took a bite. It was salty, bland. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and set down her fork. For a moment, she thought about calling Janet back, maybe just to say she understood, that she didn't want to make things difficult, that she hoped the kids liked their gifts. But her phone sat where she'd left it, screen dark, the last message still open. "There's just no room this year, Mom." Her lips pressed together. "No room," she murmured, barely above a whisper. "There's always room if you make it." She pushed the plate away and stood. The floor creaked under her slippers as she moved through the narrow hallway, past framed photos, Janet as a little girl in a winter coat, her late husband holding her steady on the ice at Fountain Square. Dust glimmered in the soft light. At the front door, Elaine paused. The snow had covered the steps, unbroken white except for one small indentation. the mail carrier's boots earlier that day. She opened the door just enough to feel the cold sting her face. Across town, in Janet's photos, the windows glowed like a warm beacon. Here, her own house was dim. Still, a single lamp flickering in the front room. She stepped outside, pulling her coat close, breath puffing into the night air. Her driveway was quiet, the world muffled by snow. From somewhere far away came the faint sound of church bells, distant but steady. Elaine closed her eyes for a moment, then turned back inside, locking the door behind her. She walked to the living room, turned off the lamp, and let darkness settle fully around her. The heater clicked, filling the silence again, and somewhere under that steady mechanical hum she whispered to herself, a promise she didn't yet understand but already felt forming. Next year, things will be different. The next morning broke pale and quiet, the sky the color of old pewter. Overnight snow had buried her walkway, soft and unbroken. Elaine watched it from the kitchen window as the coffee brewed, the slow drip and hiss filling the space her thoughts wouldn't leave empty. She spooned the last 2 cans from her pantry into a small tote bag, green beans and peaches, and tied the handles in a knot. She wasn't planning to go anywhere yesterday, but the local church had left a flyer in her mailbox the week before. Holiday food drive, no one left behind. She'd almost recycled it. Almost. The church sat 3 blocks away, its steeple pale against the gray morning sky. When she pushed open the doors, warm air and cinnamon greeted her. First, folding tables lined the hall, each draped in red cloth and stacked with donations. A few volunteers laughed softly near the coffee urns. Holiday music played from a speaker with the occasional crackle of static. Elaine slipped in quietly, setting her tote on the table marked non-perishables. The metal cans clinked as they touched. She brushed her gloves against each other and turned to leave, not looking for conversation. "Miss Elaine Carter, right?" The voice came from a woman arranging bread rolls into baskets. Round face, silver curls under a knitted cap, eyes bright with kindness and something sharper beneath it. Elaine managed a polite smile. "That's me, yes. And you must be—" "Rhonda Bell." The woman extended a flour-dusted hand. "I coordinate the charity pantry here. Don't think we've seen you at the holiday drive before." "First time," Elaine admitted, smoothing the front of her coat. "Just had a few extra things in the house." Rhonda nodded but didn't look away. "Well, we're grateful for it. You staying for cider? We've got fresh cinnamon sticks in there. None of that powdered nonsense." Elaine hesitated. "I don't want to be in the way." "Sugar, the only folks in the way are the ones who never show up," Rhonda said, her tone firm but warm. She motioned toward the back of the hall. "Come sit a minute. You look like you could use a rest." The words were gentle, but they landed like she'd been seen. Elaine followed her to a corner where mismatched chairs surrounded a table draped with a paper cloth. Rhonda poured 2 mugs of cider and handed one over. Steam curled between them. They sat for a moment without talking. The chatter of volunteers filled the hall, clinking trays, faint laughter, a hymn playing somewhere off-key. "Pretty morning, even with the cold," Elaine said finally. Rhonda studied her. "Cold don't bother folks much when they've got somewhere warm to go back to." Elaine's hands tightened around the mug. "I suppose that's true." "You here alone for Christmas?" Rhonda asked it softly, not nosy, just matter of fact, like asking about the weather. Elaine took a slow sip, letting the sweetness coat her tongue before answering. "My daughter. She said they were full this year. Full house, she said." Rhonda's brow furrowed. "Full?" "She's got her husband's family staying with them. It's fine, really. Kids running around, in-laws visiting. I understand." She smiled too quickly. "Families get busy." Rhonda nodded but didn't pretend to buy it. Busy's one thing. Forgetting where you came from's another. Elaine laughed lightly, though it cracked at the end. I wasn't forgotten. Just edited out for efficiency. The words surprised even her, and for a moment she stared into the amber cider, watching her reflection tremble. Across the room, a boy no taller than her countertop wandered over from the cookie table. He carried a small handful of candy canes in red paper wrappers. Without a word, he held one out to her. Well, thank you, sweetheart, Elaine said, her voice softening. She unwrapped it and tapped it gently against her mug. Perfect stir stick. The boy grinned, then darted away. Rhonda leaned back in her chair. That one's mama's been out of work. Church keeps them afloat till she gets back on her feet. Folks remember kindness like that, you know. Elaine traced the rim of her mug. Maybe that's the kind of family that lasts. Rhonda smiled faintly. Maybe so. They sat like that for a while, the air warm and cinnamon sweet, the snow outside starting to glitter through the church windows. Finally, Elaine reached for her purse. Thank you for the cider. I should... Rhonda stopped her with a gentle hand. You come by tomorrow. We'll be wrapping gifts for the shelter kids. Could use steady hands. Elaine hesitated, then nodded. All right. I'll bring ribbon. As she walked out into the bright white afternoon, the air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. The candy cane was still in her hand, the red stripes glinting in the sun. She paused on the steps, looking down at it, smiling faintly to herself. This, she murmured, is the only table that felt open this year. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant bells again, clearer this time, almost calling her back. Elaine tucked the candy cane carefully into her coat pocket and started toward home, unaware that this small, quiet act of belonging had just begun to change everything. The morning after the church drive, the air was brittle with cold. Frost webbed across Elaine's windshield like lace, and for a moment she simply sat behind the wheel, gloved hands on the steering wheel, watching her breath cloud the glass. The candy cane from yesterday rested on the dashboard. A flash of color in a world gone white. She started the engine. The old sedan groaned, then caught. On the passenger seat, a neat folder sat beside her purse. Birth certificate, property deed, and the file her husband had kept labeled estate to review. Someday. Someday had finally come. Downtown Cincinnati was half awake. Plows had scraped the main roads, leaving salt-crusted edges and mounds of gray snow. Elaine parked outside a small office building, the kind with glass doors and a single wreath hanging crookedly inside. The nameplate beside the elevator read, David Liu, Attorney at Law, Wills and Estates. David was already standing when she stepped in. Late 30s, pressed shirt. The sort of person who noticed details and never forgot them. He offered a small smile. Mrs. Carter, it's been a while. I was sorry to hear about Mark last year. Thank you, she said softly, removing her gloves. He always liked that you didn't waste his time. David chuckled. He liked efficiency. Guess that runs in the family. Elaine sat, across from him, smoothing her coat on her lap. The office smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. On his desk, a small snow globe gleamed, a tiny Cincinnati skyline dusted with glitter. So, he began, opening his notepad. You mentioned wanting to make some updates to your documents? I do. Her voice didn't waver. I'd like to remove my daughter, Janet Carter Kemp, from the will entirely. David's pen paused midair. All right. May I ask? It's not a misunderstanding, Elaine said quickly, then caught herself. I mean, it's not something that'll resolve. I just need it done. He nodded, professional but gentle. Understood. And in her place? Elaine looked down at her hands. They were still strong, nurse's hands, though the veins stood out now like blue cords. I'd like to name St. Margaret's Community Church as the primary recipient. They run that food drive every winter. You might have seen it. I have, he said, jotting notes. Very reputable. Any particular purpose for the funds? Yes. A portion to maintain the pantry, the rest to create a small fund for struggling nurses. New graduates, mostly. The kind my husband used to train at the hospital. He'd like that. For a moment, silence filled the office except for the faint hum of the radiator. David looked up. Mrs. Carter, are you sure you want to do this? I know how final these changes can feel. Elaine met his eyes. She left me out first. The words were plain, steady. They hung there between them, heavier than grief, but lighter than guilt. He nodded once, then began typing. I'll make sure it's airtight. While he worked, Elaine glanced around the office. A calendar pinned to the wall read, December 23rd. 2 more days until the world paused for joy. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, the sound fading into the cold. When David slid the new draft across the desk, she read every line, her name, the church, the nursing fund. Not one mention of Janet or Brian or any of the people who'd made her feel small. She picked up the pen, the weight of it grounding her. Signed once, twice, 3 times. When she set it down, she felt lighter, not free, but anchored. David gathered the papers, tucking them into a new envelope. You've done the hard part. I'll file everything first thing tomorrow. Elaine stood, pulling on her gloves again. Thank you, David, for not asking why twice. He smiled faintly. You don't strike me as someone who makes decisions halfway. Outside, the wind cut sharp along the street. She walked to her car, folder tucked under her arm. As she opened the door, a flurry of snow swirled across the hood, glinting in the winter sun. The candy cane on her dashboard had melted slightly at the ends, its red streaks blurring into white. She picked it up, turning it between her fingers. Through the windshield, the city looked washed clean. Streets empty, sky pale and bright. Elaine whispered, "No room, huh?" and slipped the candy cane into her coat pocket beside her keys. In the reflection on the glass, she almost imagined Mark standing beside her, nodding once in quiet approval. She started the engine and drove off toward home, the envelope on the seat beside her like a heartbeat. Behind her, in the stillness of the office, David Liu watched snow drift past the window. And for reasons he couldn't quite name, he felt a flicker of anger on her behalf. The day after Christmas crept in gray and heavy, the kind of cold that lingered in the bones. Elaine sat at her kitchen table, the same one she'd eaten alone at 2 nights before, papers spread out before her like a map of quiet defiance. The folder from David's office lay closed beside her, a soft reassurance that something in her life now belonged only to her. Steam rose from a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. Across from it sat her phone, black screen reflecting her tired eyes. She shouldn't have opened it. She'd told herself that last night. But she did anyway. Social media was a parade of warmth she could feel, but not enter. Janet's page glowed bright with photos. The glittering table, smiling faces, polished glassware, the fire crackling in the background. Elaine scrolled slowly, each image sharper than the one before. In one, her grandchildren stood in matching pajamas, holding up their stockings. In another, Brian lifted a wine glass mid-toast, his expression smugly satisfied. Elaine could almost hear the sound of it. The laughter, the clinking, the hum of a house too full for her. Then she saw it. A new post from Janet, time-stamped just before midnight. A single photo of the dining room, the lights low, the table empty now except for crumbs and candle wax. The caption read, "Another perfect Christmas. Wish you were here, Mom." Her name tagged. Elaine stared at it for a long time, thumb frozen above the screen. That single line cut sharper than the voicemail, sharper than the silence. Wish you were here. No apology. just a performance. The phone buzzed suddenly in her hand. A text from Lori. "So sorry about the mix-up, Elaine. I thought Janet said you were coming later." "Next year for sure." Elaine let out a small, humorless laugh, the kind that dies before it reaches the throat. She typed slowly, "I understand," then stopped. The blinking cursor waited like it expected something more. Grace, forgiveness, an exhale. But she didn't send it. Instead, she hit backspace until the screen went blank again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she locked the phone and pushed it aside. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater and the faint creak of branches outside under snow. Elaine stood and crossed to the bookshelf. On the middle shelf sat an old photo album, spine faded, corners frayed. She pulled it down and set it beside her notebook. The first photo that slipped out wasn't from Christmas. It was a summer day. Janet, maybe 8. Her hair tangled from the lake, missing a front tooth, grinning at the camera. Mark's hand rested on her shoulder. Elaine remembered taking that picture, remembered thinking that someday this would be proof of how full her life had been. She traced the edge of the image, then tucked it back in. Opening the notebook, she began to write. Not a letter, not a list of grievances, but an inventory. Lamps, china set, quilt from the guest room, jewelry she hadn't worn since Mark's funeral. The handwriting was neat, measured, each item a memory, each line a small reclaiming of control. She paused at the kitchen hutch and looked up at the framed family photo, the last one taken before Mark's illness. Janet was already married then, smiling just enough for the camera. Elaine lifted the frame, wiped the dust from the glass, and studied it. For the first time, it didn't make her sad. It made her clear. She carried the frame to the drawer, removed the picture, and slid it into a folder marked to store. Then she placed a new photo in the frame, one from last week's church drive. Rhonda in her knitted cap, handing out cider. The boy with the candy canes standing shyly in the corner. Elaine herself, caught mid-laugh, cheeks flushed with warmth. She set it back on the shelf. When she turned, the late afternoon light hit the table, catching on the pen, the paper, the faint sheen of the untouched coffee. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Lori, then a missed call from Janet. Elaine didn't look. She picked up her pen instead, added one last line to the bottom of the page. Decide what stays and what leaves. Then she closed the notebook. Outside, the snow began again. Slow, deliberate, blanketing the world in fresh silence. Elaine rose, walked to the window, and whispered, "Next year's already begun." Her phone buzzed once more on the table, screen lighting up with Janet's name. She didn't move. The light flashed, then dimmed, leaving the kitchen in soft shadow. The quiet pulse of her own decision hanging in the air like something sacred and final. The snow had stopped by morning, but the silence it left behind felt permanent. Elaine stood at her front window with a cup of tea cooling in her hands, watching sunlight glance off the white crust coating her driveway. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, almost serene, but behind her eyes, decisions were moving like quiet machinery. On the table lay another envelope from David Liu's office. She'd received his email last night confirming the filing, but paper felt more certain, tangible. She slit the seal carefully with a butter knife and scanned the pages, the words formal and final. Transfer of deed, primary residence, placed under Carter Trust, revocable by owner, non-probate designation. Ironclad, just as he promised. She laid the papers flat, smoothing the crease with her palm, for, the first time in months, her house didn't feel like a waiting room for loss. It felt like hers. Every corner, every floorboard, every quiet breath of heat through the vents. After lunch, she opened her phone and scrolled to emergency contacts. Janet's name sat just beneath the number of her late husband's old apartment. Elaine hovered over it for a beat, then pressed remove. The confirmation prompt blinked up. Are you sure? She tapped yes. The screen went dark, and with it came an unexpected sense of ease, like the house itself had exhaled. By afternoon, she'd made another decision. She called the St. Vincent shelter on Elm and arranged a pickup for the next morning. The woman on the phone sounded surprised when Elaine said she was donating half her furniture. Ma'am, are you moving? No, Elaine replied. Just making room. That evening, the shelter truck came early. Two men with soft voices and careful hands carried out the extra sofa, the sideboard, the dining chairs she no longer needed. The house grew spacious as they worked. When they left, she stood in the empty living room, light from the setting sun streaking across the bare floor. It didn't feel lonely. It felt ready. She took down the family portraits next, the formal ones, the posed ones, the ones meant to prove something. Glass frames clicked softly as she stacked them in a box labeled storage, not display. Then she replaced them with prints she'd found online of winter landscapes, places she'd never been but might have loved. A Maine coastline, an Oregon forest, a snowy field somewhere unnamed. When she stepped back, the walls looked lighter, freer of obligation. Outside, the mailbox flag stood upright. A red envelope peeked from the slot, the edges curled slightly from moisture. Elaine pulled it out, recognizing Janet's looping handwriting. To Mom. With love, Merry Christmas. She stared at it for a moment, thumb tracing the gold script. Then she set it on the counter, unopened, beside the stack of removed frames. Some things didn't deserve an audience. She moved through the house, turning off lights, the air dimming to a soft amber dusk. Just as she reached the front hallway, the doorbell rang. The sound startled her. It was too cheerful, too alive for the stillness she'd built. Elaine hesitated, then opened the door a few inches. Janet stood there, cheeks pink from the cold, a forced brightness in her eyes. In her arms, a bouquet of white lilies wrapped in cellophane. Behind her, a man in a charcoal coat stood slightly back, holding a leather portfolio. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Mom, Janet began, voice lilting in practiced warmth. I thought I'd surprise you. We were in the neighborhood. Elaine's gaze flicked to the man. And this is? Oh. Janet turned slightly. This is Peter. He's Brian's friend. He helps families organize their finances. We just thought, after Dad passed, it might be smart to... Elaine's hand tightened on the door edge. I'm fine, Janet. Of course, Janet said quickly, the brightness faltering. We just wanted to make sure everything's structured. You know how complicated estates can get. Peter stepped forward, his tone smooth. Mrs. Carter, it's always wise to review your documents annually. We specialize in... I have someone, Elaine interrupted. Her voice was even, calm, but there was iron beneath it. And he's already done everything that needs doing. Janet blinked, caught off guard. You mean, you've updated things? Elaine didn't answer. She simply opened the door a little wider, long enough to take the flowers from Janet's hands. These are lovely, she said, her tone polite but distant. Drive safe. The road's ice over after dark. Mom, wait. But Elaine was already closing the door. The latch clicked softly. Final. She stood in the hallway, the bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. Through the frosted glass, she saw their figures linger for a moment before turning back toward the car. She carried the flowers to the kitchen, unwrapped them, and placed them in a tall vase. They were beautiful. Too perfect, too white, smelling faintly of lilies and apology. As she arranged them, her gaze landed on the red envelope still sitting on the counter. She smiled faintly, almost sadly, then dropped the unopened card into the trash beside the crumpled cellophane. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the window, then disappeared down the street. Elaine stood there a moment longer, then whispered, "You brought sharks to shallow water." Her reflection in the darkened glass didn't look small anymore, and somewhere across town, in a quiet office lit by a single desk lamp, David Liu's phone buzzed. A message from Elaine Carter. They came. He stared at the screen, then began typing back. Elaine sat at the kitchen table long after the headlights vanished, her hands folded neatly beside the vase of lilies. The flowers looked ghostly under the low lamplight, too elegant, too contrived, like something sent to a hospital room rather than a home. Her phone buzzed once more on the counter. David Liu, incoming call. She answered on the second ring. "They came," she said simply. "I saw your message," David replied. "Did they say what they wanted?" "A financial planner," Elaine said, her voice dry. "Brian's friend, apparently. He didn't get far." "You didn't sign anything, right?" Elaine let out a small, incredulous laugh. "David, please." "Good. Just making sure. What was his name?" She walked over to the door where she'd left her coat. Reaching into the pocket, she pulled out the card Peter had offered before she shut the door. It was thick cardstock, expensive, embossed with gold lettering. Peter Hanlon, Financial Strategy Consultant, Kemp and Associates. She read it aloud. David exhaled audibly through the line. "I'll check him out. Something about that name rings a bell." "Make sure you use gloves," she said, and he chuckled. When the call ended, she turned off the kitchen light. The house settled into quiet again. But Elaine didn't go to bed. She stayed up reading by the soft glow of a single lamp, the card sitting face up beside her like evidence. By morning, frost had thickened on the windows. She moved through her morning ritual: coffee, oatmeal, the steady rhythm of order she'd built from solitude. Halfway through folding laundry, her phone buzzed again. David Liu. Found him. Peter Hanlon's not a licensed fiduciary. He was sued twice in the last decade for elder exploitation, pressuring clients into reinvesting assets into his own ventures, settled both cases out of court. Elaine stared at the message for a long moment, the words sinking in slowly. She should have felt angry, but what she felt instead was confirmed. Her instincts had been right. Janet hadn't just shown up to apologize. She'd brought a shark into her mother's home and called it a favor. She placed the phone on the counter, her movements calm, deliberate. Then she tore the business card in half, once cleanly down the center, and dropped the pieces into the trash beside the now wilted lilies. Her mind was already moving ahead, past outrage, past hurt, into something colder and far more precise. By late morning, the sky had clouded over again, muting the light. She walked through her nearly emptied living room, now stripped of all sentimental clutter. The walls breathed easier. So did she. Her phone chimed. A text. This time from Rhonda. "Rhonda, you still good, sugar? Been thinking about you." Elaine's thumb hovered before she typed her reply. "Elaine. They brought sharks. I'm bringing fences." A bubble appeared, Rhonda typing back, but Elaine didn't wait to read it. She set the phone down, opened her notebook, and began a new list. Security system upgrade, attorney review of property boundaries, locksmith, change all exterior keys. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. As she wrote, the house filled with the soft scratch of pen against paper and the hum of the furnace kicking on. Her world had shrunk in some ways. Fewer people, fewer possessions. But within that smallness was something vast and controlled. When she finished, she tore the page from the notebook and placed it beside the envelope from David's office, weighting it down with her coffee mug. Outside, a car slowed near her house, engine idling just a little too long. Elaine moved to the window but didn't part the curtain. The car eventually rolled on. She allowed herself a faint smile. The lilies on the counter had begun to brown at their edges. She leaned forward, cut the stems down with kitchen scissors, and carried them outside to the trash bin. The air bit against her skin, sharp and clean. As she closed the lid, she caught sight of the mailbox flag still raised from yesterday. She hadn't lowered it. The thought made her pause. She walked over, flipped it down, and whispered, "No more open invitations." Back inside, her phone buzzed again. Another message from David. David Liu. "You did the right thing, Elaine. I'll handle anything that comes next." She typed back one word. Elaine. Good. Then she set the phone face down and looked around the house that was finally hers alone. Every surface was clean, every corner defined. For the first time in years, the space felt not empty but fortified. Still, beneath the calm, something new stirred, a quiet pulse of battle readiness. Elaine Carter wasn't done being left out. She was just getting started. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs drifted down Rhonda Bell's narrow street before Elaine even reached the porch. Warm light poured from the windows of the small blue bungalow, golden against the dark winter evening. For a second, standing at the gate, Elaine hesitated. She hadn't eaten dinner with anyone since Mark passed. Not properly, not at a table that wasn't her own. Rhonda spotted her through the window and waved. "Get on in here, sugar. You're letting the heat out." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rosemary, baked bread, and something sweet cooling on the counter. Elaine closed the door behind her, stamping the snow from her boots. "You didn't have to cook," she said. "I would have brought something." Rhonda shook her head, ladle in hand. "I've seen how you work, always giving something. Tonight, you sit, you take." Elaine smiled faintly. "Bossy." "Efficient," Rhonda corrected with a wink. "Now go on, table's ready." The kitchen was small, but every inch of it radiated life. A mismatched table sat in the center, covered with a faded plaid cloth. 2 candles flickered beside a chipped ceramic bowl of green beans. Elaine took her seat, and Rhonda slid a plate in front of her. Roasted chicken, bread, and mashed potatoes that smelled like butter and warmth. They ate quietly for a while. The only sound, the clink of silverware and the occasional low hum of the radio. It felt comfortable, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Halfway through the meal, Rhonda set down her fork. "You've been quiet tonight." Elaine took a sip of water, thinking. "I've been steady." "That's new." Rhonda nodded slowly. "Steady's good. Beats the kind of tired that's bone deep." Elaine traced the edge of her plate with her finger. "I think I'm finally learning the difference between peace and emptiness. Took me long enough." "Mm-hmm," Rhonda said, folding her napkin. "Folks get those mixed up all the time." They sat for another moment before Elaine added softly, "I was never asking to be honored, you know. I didn't need to be the head of the table or the story everyone tells. I just wanted to be included." Rhonda looked up, eyes soft but unwavering. "That's why you're gonna be remembered, Elaine. People who demand to be honored fade fast, but people who just want to belong, they leave marks that don't wash off." Elaine's throat tightened, but she smiled through it. "You always talk like you've already lived 2 lives." "Maybe I have," Rhonda said, laughing. "But you," she pointed her fork at Elaine, "you're starting your second one right now, I can see it." For a while after, they talked about everything but the past, the weather, the church pantry, how the boy with the candy canes wanted to be a firefighter. When the dishes were cleared, Rhonda brought out a small dessert, bread pudding with raisins and a hint of whiskey. Elaine laughed as Rhonda poured an extra drizzle of sauce over her portion. "This is too much," Elaine said, though she didn't stop her. "Too much is what holidays are supposed to feel like," Rhonda replied. Later, when Rhonda busied herself at the sink, Elaine quietly pulled an envelope from her coat pocket. Inside was a check. Unmarked, unsigned but ready. She'd filled it out that afternoon after reviewing her trust paperwork again. The amount wasn't enormous, but it was enough to keep the church pantry stocked for a long time. When Rhonda turned away to rinse a pan, Elaine slipped the envelope into the basket by the door, the one labeled Donations and Tithes. Her handwriting on the note inside was simple, in memory of Mark Carter. For those who still need a seat at the table. As she buttoned her coat, Rhonda called out, "You sure you don't want to take leftovers?" Elaine smiled. "I've already got what I came for." Rhonda followed her to the door, pressing a hand on her shoulder. "You come by New Year's, all right? We're doing potluck and prayer. No RSVP, no nonsense. Just show up. I'll think about it." "Don't think too long," Rhonda said, grinning. "Food's better when it's shared." Outside, the air was cold but kind. Elaine's breath curled in front of her as she walked back toward her car. The neighborhood shimmered with faint Christmas lights, some still blinking, some already dimmed. She glanced back once through the window. Rhonda was tidying up, humming softly. Elaine slid into the driver's seat, turned on the heat, and looked at her phone resting in the cup holder. One new voicemail notification, no number saved. She tapped play. Janet's voice filled the car, low and uneasy. "Mom, we need to talk. Please call me back. It's important." Elaine stared through the windshield, the street lamp light cutting a gold line across her face. She didn't press delete. She didn't save it either. She just let the message end and sat there in the stillness, hands resting calmly on the wheel. "Important to who?" she whispered. Then she shifted the car into drive, the church's donation envelope already tucked safely out of sight, and pulled into the snow-bright street, her headlights cutting cleanly through the night. The next morning dawned soft and colorless, a sky rinsed clean of clouds. Elaine moved slowly through her quiet house, folding warm linens from the dryer. The rhythm soothed her, crease, fold, stack. Each motion erased another trace of yesterday. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Once, twice, then again. By the fourth ring, she sighed and walked over. 4 new voicemails blinked on the screen. All from Janet. Elaine turned down the radio and pressed play. The first message came out sharp and brittle. Janet's voice clipped with irritation. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're ignoring me now? I came by with flowers, tried to talk about your finances, and you just shut the door in my face? I don't know what you're thinking, but this isn't fair." Elaine folded a towel, slow and even. The second message started calmer, but the strain was there, thin as glass. "Okay, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I didn't mean to upset you. Brian thinks you might be confused about something. Can you please call me? I just need to make sure you're all right." Elaine switched the laundry basket to her other hip, eyes flicking toward the window. Outside, snow was falling again. Steady, patient flakes that erased the hard edges of the world. The third voicemail hit harder. Janet's voice trembled between anger and something like fear. "Mom, I just talked to someone at the courthouse. Why? Is David Liu updating your trust again? Are you changing things without telling me? This isn't how family works. You can't just cut people out like that." Elaine set the folded sheet on the pile and stood still. A small smile ghosted across her lips. Not cruel, just knowing. The fourth voicemail was quieter, almost childlike. "Mom, please. I don't understand what's happening. Just call me. We can talk it through." The message ended, the silence afterward somehow louder than all 4 combined. Elaine didn't replay them. She deleted each one, her thumb steady, deliberate. Then she set the phone face down and went back to folding. A few minutes later, the landline rang, an old habit she'd never broken, keeping both numbers. She almost ignored it, but the caller ID flashed a name she hadn't seen in months. Logan Carter. Her brother. She answered on the third ring. Logan. Elaine. His voice carried that familiar blend of charm and condescension. You've got Janet in a panic. She says you're rewriting the will? What's going on? Elaine laid another towel flat on the table. It's not your concern. You're my sister. Of course it's my concern. She paused. You have your own estate, Logan. Your own house. Your own family. My affairs are mine. There was a beat of silence before his tone hardened. You're not thinking clearly. You've been alone too long. I can come up there next week. Help you get things in order. Things, she repeated softly. Logan, I'm in perfect order, but thank you. Elaine. She ended the call. The dial tone hummed for a moment before the line clicked dead. Outside, snow gathered on the window pane, the world dissolving into white. Elaine carried her basket of folded linens to the hallway closet, stacking each piece neatly inside. The house was warm, still, its quiet almost defiant. An hour later, the doorbell chimed. When she opened it, Rhonda stood on the porch, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a foil-wrapped tray. Brought something from my favorite fortress builder, she said, brushing snow from her coat. Elaine laughed softly. You bake enough for an army, Rhonda. Army of 2 counts, Rhonda replied, handing her the tray. Sugar cookies and a note from one of the Sunday kids. Said to give it to the nice lady with the gray scarf. Elaine peeled back the corner of the foil. Inside, neat rows of sugar cookies dusted with red sprinkles and a folded piece of construction paper. She opened it. A child's handwriting in thick marker. Merry Christmas, Miss Elaine. You are kind and strong. God says you belong. Her throat tightened. She set the note on the table, pressing her palm against it like sealing a promise. Thank you, she said quietly, for remembering me. Rhonda smiled. You remember yourself just fine now, don't you? Elaine met her gaze. Starting to. They stood for a moment in the doorway, the scent of cookies and cold air mingling. Then Rhonda squeezed her arm. You call if you need anything, you hear? Snow's comin' heavy tonight. I will, Elaine said. When the door shut, the house felt warm again. Not because of the heater, but because the loneliness that used to echo in every room didn't sound so hollow anymore. Elaine poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the snow deepen into soft drifts across the yard. The phone sat silent on the counter, its black screen reflecting the glow of the Christmas lights she'd left up in the front window. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she broke one of Rhonda's cookies in half, took a bite, and whispered, Peace isn't quiet. It's chosen. Outside, the storm began to build. A clean, relentless kind of white that hid everything but truth. By the time the storm cleared, the world outside Elaine's windows had transformed into something pale and sharp-edged, like the aftermath of a revelation. Her phone chimed with a message from David. Filed the cease and desist first thing. Police report attached. Don't answer their calls for now. Elaine opened the attachment. A formal document stared back. Neat lines, legal headers, the clean language of protection. The report confirmed what she already knew in her bones. Brian had been making inquiries about her accounts, pretending to be her financial proxy. Janet's husband had crossed from arrogance into crime. Elaine's hand didn't shake as she printed the papers and slipped them into a folder marked House Documents. She carried it to her bedroom, opened the old cedar chest at the foot of the bed, and slid the file beneath her husband's folded flag. Then she closed the lid and exhaled slowly. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Rhonda, bundled in her green winter coat, holding 2 cups of coffee. Caffeine delivery, she said. You look like you could use something stronger than peace and quiet. Elaine smiled faintly and took 1 cup. Peace and quiet's losing its novelty. Rhonda tilted her head, studying her friend. You've got that nurse look again. The one that says someone's in trouble and you're fixing to chart it. They tried to impersonate me, Elaine said simply. Called the courthouse pretending to be my representatives. David shut it down before it grew legs. Rhonda's eyes widened. Lord have mercy, you call the police? Already handled. Filed, notarized, and stamped. Well, Rhonda blew across her coffee. I'd hate to be on your bad side. Elaine smiled without humor. They wanted control. I gave them consequences instead. That afternoon, she drove to the church. The sanctuary smelled of pine and peppermint. The volunteers had turned the fellowship hall into a small gift-wrapping assembly line. Children's toys, donated coats, ribbons scattered across the tables. Elaine took a seat beside a woman, wrapping dolls in gold paper. Her own pile was simple: mittens, books, small things that meant warmth. She worked quietly, her movements steady and precise. Each package she wrapped felt like a correction to the chaos her family had created. When Rhonda passed by, she dropped an envelope onto Elaine's stack. Power company form. You were asking about that single mom, remember? Elaine nodded, opened her checkbook, and filled it out right there amid the laughter and crinkling paper. The total was small, a month's overdue electric bill. But when she slipped the check into the envelope, it felt like setting something right in a way the law never could. By the time evening fell, the church had grown quiet. The last of the volunteers left with tired smiles and thermoses of cocoa. Elaine stayed behind, collecting stray bits of ribbon, stacking gift boxes against the wall. The sound of distant wind pressed softly against the stained glass windows. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. An email notification. She almost ignored it, but the sender's name stopped her. From Lori Carter. Subject: just trying to understand. Elaine hesitated, then opened it. Elaine, I heard from Janet that there's been tension. I don't know what's true and what's exaggerated, but I can't stand seeing the family like this. Maybe Janet handled things wrong, but she's trying. I just hope you can forgive her someday. She really thought she was helping. Please don't do anything you can't undo. The message went on, winding through half-hearted apologies and diluted guilt, words meant to soothe everyone but the person actually hurt. Elaine read it twice, then clicked archive. Outside, wind gusted harder, rattling the church door. She stood, pulling on her coat, and switched off the lights. The sanctuary fell into shadow except for the soft glow of the nativity candles near the altar. She lingered a moment, watching the small flicker of the flame against the carved wood. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, with a text from David. Need to talk. Something came through the clerk's office. Her heart didn't race, but a strange stillness settled over her. What kind of something? She typed back. The reply came quickly. An official petition. Janet filed to contest your competency. Elaine stood in the quiet church, the hum of the furnace low and steady. Snow began to patter against the stained glass again, a whispering rhythm like soft applause. She didn't curse. She didn't tremble. She just smiled faintly, the kind of smile forged in long corridors and late-night hospital shifts. Well, she murmured to the empty room, that's one way to admit defeat. The last candle flickered out as she stepped into the cold, her breath vanishing into the night. The courthouse looked colder than the air outside it, all polished marble and fluorescent indifference. Elaine sat on the bench outside the clerk's office, her gloved hands folded. Neatly in her lap, the calm of someone who's already rehearsed every possible outcome. Across from her, David Liu scrolled through documents on his tablet, jaw tight. You sure you want to go through the evaluation? He asked quietly. We could fight the petition on principle alone. I'm sure, Elaine said. Let them test me. I've spent a lifetime proving I can think clearly under pressure. Might as well do it one more time. David studied her for a long moment. then nodded. They'll regret making this part of the record. He was right. The next morning, a licensed psychologist met her at his downtown office. Kind eyes, but cautious, like he'd already been briefed on the case. Elaine shook his hand, signed her consent form, and took the seat across from his desk. For the next 2 hours, she answered every question. Memory sequences, logic puzzles, ethical scenarios. She recited lists backward, solved arithmetic problems, recalled names after a timed pause. Every answer came out steady, measured, without the faintest tremor of doubt. When it was over, the doctor smiled. Mrs. Carter, I don't usually comment before the report's complete, but if anyone ever questions your competency again, tell them to call me directly. Elaine laughed, a low, genuine sound that surprised even her. I'll keep your number handy. 2 days later, David delivered the results to her in person. She met him at the coffee shop near the courthouse, a small place with fogged windows and the smell of burnt espresso. He slid the sealed envelope across the table like a verdict. Read it, he said. Elaine tore it open and skimmed the summary. Cognitive and psychological testing reveals no impairment or diminished capacity. Subject displays above-average reasoning, insight, and executive function. Highly articulate and self-aware. Results indicate full competency. She closed the folder, her expression unreadable. So much paperwork just to prove I'm still myself. David smiled faintly. Now it's official. And when we file this with the court, their petition doesn't just fail, it collapses. Elaine nodded. Then let's collapse it. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood polish and nerves. Rows of pew-like benches filled with murmuring strangers, the occasional camera flash from a local reporter trying to make small-town scandal sound like news. Janet sat 3 rows ahead, wearing a beige suit and an expression too studied to be genuine. Brian beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. Elaine didn't look their way. When the judge entered, the murmurs stilled. David handled the formalities quickly, his voice calm and clipped. Then he stepped aside, handing the judge a single-page letter. My client wishes to submit her own written statement, he said. Elaine didn't stand. She simply nodded once as the judge adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. Her handwriting, rendered in black ink, was precise and unwavering. I've spent my life caring for others, patients, family, strangers who needed a steady hand. The irony of being called unfit now is not lost on me, but I won't argue emotion. I'll offer evidence. I live independently. I manage my finances. I pay my taxes. I volunteer weekly. I am not fading. I am evolving. And if this is what independence looks like to others, quiet, organized, unwilling to be exploited, then I accept that misunderstanding with grace. The judge paused, scanning the last lines. Competency isn't about who you trust. It's about knowing who not to. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of paper settling seemed too loud. Finally, the judge looked up. Petition denied, he said firmly. Dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Carter, you are free to go. And I suggest your family respect that freedom. Elaine inclined her head once. Thank you, Your Honor. As she rose, Janet turned slightly in her seat, eyes wide with something between disbelief and panic. Elaine met her gaze just long enough to offer a polite, measured smile, the kind that said, lesson learned. Outside the courthouse, snow was melting along the curbs, sunlight catching in the puddles. David joined her at the top of the steps, phone in hand. He typed something, hit send, and turned the screen for her to see. 2. Kemp Law Group message, do not contact again. Elaine let out a slow breath, the cold air curling past her lips. Short and merciful, she said. Exactly like you asked. They walked together toward her car, boots crunching against thawing snow. Halfway down the steps, she stopped, glancing back at the courthouse doors. I think, she said quietly, that was the first time I ever let someone else defend me, and it felt good. David smiled. You earned the quiet that comes after. As he turned to leave, she looked up at the pale sky, the light diffused and soft, and whispered, Peace isn't quiet. It's chosen. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. An unknown number. No message. She didn't look. Instead, she opened her car door, slid inside, and started the engine. The world outside her windshield looked bright, clean, waiting. The rain came down sharp and silver, slicing through the gray of late afternoon. It wasn't the gentle kind that soaked into the earth. It was cold, relentless, a storm that seemed to exist for the sole purpose of clearing the world clean. Elaine stood at the counter, sleeves rolled past her elbows, her hands deep in a bowl of dough. The smell of yeast and flour filled the kitchen. Warm, human, alive. Outside, the rain pattered against the window in erratic rhythm. When the doorbell rang, she didn't look up. The chime echoed once, twice, a pause, then again. Longer, this time, insistent. She wiped her hands on a towel, crossed to the front window, and parted the curtain just an inch. Janet stood on the porch. Her hair was plastered to her face, mascara running in faint black streaks. She clutched something in her hands, a purse maybe, or a folder. It was hard to tell through the curtain's dim filter. Her coat was too thin for the weather, the kind of coat chosen for appearance, not protection. Elaine let the fabric fall back into place and returned to the counter. The doorbell rang again, then a rapid series of knocks. Mom! Janet's voice carried through the wood, muffled but strained. Please open the door, we just need to talk. Elaine pressed the dough flat against the counter, the texture soft beneath her palms. She folded, turned, kneaded. The steady push and roll drowned out the sound of the rain, of Janet's voice, of everything but the work. The knocking grew louder. I'm sorry, all right? Janet's tone cracked. You humiliated me in court. You made me look crazy. Elaine exhaled slowly, almost in time with the movement of her hands. There was no triumph in it, only quiet clarity. I was just trying to help. Janet's voice wavered now, softer, like she was losing her script. I don't know what happened to us, Mom. Why can't you just pick up the phone? The words hit the walls, thin and desperate. But they didn't pierce. When the silence finally came, it was sudden and absolute. No knocking, no yelling, just the low hiss of rain spilling from the gutters. Elaine looked up from the dough. The rhythm of her kneading slowed until it stopped completely. She waited. A full minute passed before she heard the faint crinkle, paper sliding under the door. Then footsteps retreating down the steps, shoes splashing through puddles, the engine of a car starting. Elaine stood still for another moment before walking over. A single folded page lay on the mat, damp at the edges. She picked it up, unfolded it carefully. Janet's handwriting filled the page, uneven and smudged. This isn't fair. You're my mother. You're supposed to need me. Elaine read it once, eyes tracing every letter, every word that used to hold power. Then she carried it into the kitchen, lit a match, and touched it to the corner of the paper. The flame caught fast, curling black along the edges, shrinking the words to ash. She dropped it into the sink, let the water run, and watched the fire vanish into steam. For a long while, the only sound was the tap dripping and the rain softening outside. The phone rang. Elaine wiped her hands on a towel and answered. Hello? Hey, sugar. Rhonda's voice came warm and steady through the line. Heard from David. Sounds like the storm finally passed your way. Something like that, Elaine said, glancing at the faint wisp of smoke rising from the sink. I just wanted to say, you've been stronger than most, Elaine. Some folks fold when the world turns cold. You built a fire instead. Elaine smiled softly. Maybe I just learned what deserves warmth and what doesn't. I'll take that sermon, Rhonda said, laughing. You coming by tomorrow? We've got leftover pie. Maybe, Elaine said, if the road's clear. When she hung up, the quiet settled again. Outside, the rain was easing, the world rinsed clean. Elaine covered the dough with a towel and left it to rise. She turned off the kitchen light, the faint orange glow from the window spilling across the counter like sunrise. In the corner of the sink, the last curl of burned paper crumbled into nothing. Elaine whispered, barely audible, "Supposed to need you? Not anymore." And then she smiled, not in defiance, not in victory, but in something simpler. Peace. Until the faint sound of a car idling drifted through the rain again, lingering, waiting, and her expression hardened just slightly. She reached for her phone. Elaine. David. Someone's outside again. The hospital smelled like bleach and brewed coffee, a mix of cleanliness and fatigue. The same scent Elaine had lived half her life in, back when long shifts and white corridors were her normal. She hadn't set foot in one since Mark's last night. Now she moved quietly through the hallway, her steps steady, her coat zipped to the throat. A small gift bag hung from her wrist, soft slippers, a bottle of lavender lotion, and a card with her handwriting inside. Simple, careful words. Room 417. She paused before the door. Lori Carter, the sister-in-law who'd said nothing when silence had cost so much. Elaine knocked once and stepped in. Lori looked smaller than Elaine remembered, her hair pulled back in a thin ponytail, IV taped to the back of her hand. The heart monitor ticked faintly beside her, a soft rhythm, like a distant metronome. "Elaine," Lori whispered, eyes widening, "you didn't have to—" "I know." Elaine set the bag on the bedside table. "But I wanted to." Lori swallowed, her voice rasping. "It's just a minor infection, nothing serious." "I figured. Still, hospitals are cold." They sat in the quiet for a few seconds, the kind of quiet where every unspoken word feels like it's hovering in the room, trying to find a place to land. Finally, Lori reached for the gift bag. "You always were thoughtful." Elaine smiled faintly. "Habit." Lori took out the card, turning it over in her hand before opening it. Her eyes glistened as she read the short message inside. "Rest easy. Heal well. You were family long before paperwork ever said so." She looked up, voice trembling. "You mean that?" Elaine met her gaze evenly. "I don't write what I don't mean." Lori nodded, her throat working. "Janet told me you've been keeping to yourself?" "I have," Elaine said. "It's been quiet. It suits me." Lori hesitated. "She's not herself lately?" "I think she knows she went too far." "That's between her and her conscience," Elaine said softly. "I'm not in that equation anymore." The words weren't sharp. They were level, even. The tone of someone who'd moved past anger into something steadier. Lori didn't push. She just nodded and reached for Elaine's hand. "You always had more grace than the rest of us." Elaine smiled gently, then stood. "Get some rest, Lori. I'll check in next week." She turned toward the door and froze. Janet stood at the far end of the hallway. Her hair was pinned back, her coat immaculate, her face pale and taut. Their eyes met across the sterile distance. No words, no gestures. Just a moment that felt both endless and already over. Janet opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. Elaine gave a small, courteous nod, polite as any stranger passing in a hallway, and kept walking. As she turned the corner, her pulse stayed steady. No trembling hands, no ache, just peace. Outside, snow flurried weakly over the parking lot, melting as it hit the asphalt. Rhonda's van pulled up to the curb, headlights cutting through the gray. She leaned out the window, grinning. You on chauffeur duty, or do I get to call you volunteer number 2? Elaine slid into the passenger seat, chuckling. Volunteer number 2, I suppose. The back of the van was stacked with containers, soups, rolls, thermoses of cocoa. Rhonda had written for the night staff on a note card taped to the lid. I figured we'd start with the ER, Rhonda said, pulling into the Circle Drive. Those folks don't get to breathe long enough to sit. Together, they carried the containers inside, the warmth of broth and bread wafting through the corridor. Nurses smiled in surprise, grateful eyes shining beneath tired faces. Elaine found herself laughing quietly at something one of the younger nurses said, about how food was the only thing that made Christmas shifts bearable. When they stepped back outside, Rhonda blew into her hands. Well, look at us. 2 saints in sensible shoes. Elaine smiled. I'm not sure saints enjoy it this much. Rhonda laughed, starting the van. You'd be surprised. As they drove, the city lights shimmered faintly against the slick streets. Elaine watched the hospital fade in the rearview mirror, a soft blur of yellow windows and reflection. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she'd left something behind. She felt like she'd finished something. Back home, she hung her coat by the door and set the empty thermos on the counter. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was resting. On the table lay the church's volunteer sheet for next month. She picked it up, tracing her name already written there in blue ink. Her phone buzzed once. An unknown number. Again. She stared at it a long moment, then let it ring until it stopped. Through the window, the sky was clearing, moonlight spilling over the snow. Elaine whispered, I remember the good parts, not the noise. And for the first time that winter, she turned off every light and went to bed smiling. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, soft and forgiving. A faint scent of cinnamon lingered from the cookies Rhonda had dropped off the night before. Elaine sat at the table with a steaming mug of tea, 3 cream-colored envelopes spread before her, their corners perfectly aligned. The stationery was heavy, good paper, the kind that didn't crumple under the weight of truth. She'd written the first letter 3 times before this one. Each draft had been too kind, too restrained, too much like the woman she'd spent a lifetime being. But this morning she wrote with the steady hand of someone who had nothing left to prove. The pen moved across the page, smooth and sure. Janet, I have spent months listening to what silence sounds like. It is calmer than I expected. In that quiet, I realized that love and obligation are not the same thing. You confused them long before I did. I won't tell you what you did wrong. You already know. I'm writing to tell you what I learned. Love without respect turns hollow, and respect without empathy turns cruel. I no longer live in the space where you left me. I built another life, and it's smaller but truer. I hope you build one of your own without needing to steal from mine. Legacy is earned, not assumed. Elaine set the pen down and breathed out slowly, the kind of release that came after holding something in for years. The second letter was easier. To her son, Michael, who lived in another state and rarely called, except when tax season reminded him she existed. Michael, distance was our truce. You chose your own world, and I didn't stop you. I hope it's been kind to you. This isn't punishment. It's simply alignment. I'm leaving you the same thing you've given me: peace and silence. Legacy is earned, not assumed. And the third, to her youngest, Logan, whose charm had always been a mask for convenience. Logan, you told me once that independence looked lonely on me. You were wrong. It looks like freedom. I forgive you for confusing manipulation with care. It was what you were taught. But I won't let it near me again. Legacy is earned, not assumed. When she finished, she stacked the letters neatly, sliding each into its envelope. Her handwriting on the front was elegant, deliberate. No return address. The kettle whistled behind her, breaking the hush. Elaine poured herself more tea, the sound of it steady and small. She felt no anger, no triumph, just completion. A knock came at the door. "Morning, sugar," Rhonda called, stepping inside before Elaine could answer. She carried a paper bag filled with stamps and a roll of packing tape. "You ready to send your homework?" Elaine smiled faintly. "Ready as I'll ever be." They sat together at the table, sealing the envelopes. Rhonda slid them into a small canvas mailing pouch. "You sure about all this?" she asked, glancing at her friend. "I've never been surer," Elaine said. "If the truth is going to outlive me, I want it written in my own hand." Rhonda nodded, pressing each envelope flat. "Fair enough. You want me to drop these off on my way to the church?" Elaine hesitated, then smiled. "Please. It'll feel more official coming from you." As Rhonda gathered the letters, Elaine reached for another folder, one stamped addendum. "David drew this up for me yesterday," she said, sliding it across the table. "It's the last update to the trust. Just one small change." Rhonda squinted. "You sure you want me looking at legal stuff? I get dizzy just reading the church bulletin." Elaine chuckled. "It's nothing complicated." She flipped open the folder and pointed to a single typed line, "Medical power of attorney, Rhonda M. Bell." Rhonda blinked, her usual quick humor faltering. "Elaine? No. You got family for this." "I had family," Elaine corrected gently. "Now I have someone who listens when I speak and doesn't decide for me. That's the person I trust to make choices if I can't." Rhonda shook her head, tears pricking at her eyes. "You don't have to do that, honey. I'm just your neighbor with bad knees and a big mouth." Elaine reached across the table and took her hand. "You're the only person who knocked on my door without wanting anything." The room fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt earned, not empty. Finally, Rhonda exhaled and gave a small laugh. "You really are something else, Elaine Carter." "Just practical," Elaine said. When Rhonda left, the letters in her bag, the house felt lighter. Elaine walked to the window, watching her friend's car pull away down the slushy, one street. Snow still clung to the curbs in gray ridges, melting slowly under the winter sun. She turned back to the table, looked at the cooling tea, and smiled to herself. There was no going back now. Not that she wanted to. In her notebook, she wrote a single sentence before closing it for good. "Some families inherit blood. Others earn trust." The phone buzzed once, David's name on the screen. "David. Addendum filed. Everything official. You did it." Elaine typed one word back. "Elaine. Finally." She set the phone down, reached for her coat, and stepped outside. The air was crisp and quiet, the sky wide and forgiving. Behind her, inside the house that was now entirely hers, the kitchen clock ticked on, steady, unhurried, marking the moment she rewrote not just her legacy, but the meaning of her name. The first thing Elaine noticed that morning was how ordinary it all felt. No storm clouds, no voicemails waiting, no restless ache in her chest. Just the steady hum of the heater and the sound of pen against paper. David Liu sat across from her at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose as he arranged the last of the paperwork. A neat pile of signatures, notarizations, and witness forms rested between them. Her life, now legally untangled. "That should do it," he said, straightening the final page. "This officially finalizes the trust. Medical and financial powers of attorney are assigned to Ms. Rhonda M. Bell. Your former designees, Janet, Brian, and Logan, are fully removed from all decision-making authority." Elaine nodded once. "Completely?" David smiled slightly. "Completely. They can't contest or override a single clause without a court order, and after the competency ruling, no judge in this county will entertain it. She exhaled, slow and even. Good. Then I think I'm done letting people make choices for me. He packed the documents into his briefcase. You've built something solid here, Elaine. Most people come to me trying to protect money. You came here trying to protect peace. I figured out which one lasts longer, she said softly. They both smiled. After he left, the quiet settled back into its usual rhythm, the click of the furnace, the soft creak of the old floors. Elaine poured herself another cup of coffee and looked out at the backyard. The snow was melting, the ground showing patches of dull brown grass. By noon, a knock came at the door. Rhonda stood there, cheeks flushed, a small sapling in her arms, its roots wrapped in burlap and soil still damp from the nursery. "What's this?" Elaine asked, already smiling. "Figured you could use some new life in that yard," Rhonda said. "Something that grows, not just sits pretty. Thought about a magnolia, but that felt too showy." "So," she patted the small trunk. "A maple. Steady. Doesn't mind the cold." Together, they carried it out back. The ground was soft enough now to dig. Elaine held the tree, upright while Rhonda shoveled. The air smelled of earth and thawing winter. When they finished, Rhonda leaned on her shovel, wiping her brow. "You think it'll take root?" Elaine looked at the tiny tree, fragile, thin, trembling slightly in the wind. "It already has," she said. Rhonda smiled. "You gonna name it?" "I think I'll just let it grow." They stood there a while longer, breathing in the sharp air. The afternoon light caught in the bare branches above, gold and cold at once. Later that evening, Elaine sat at her desk reviewing one last document, a small endowment form. At the top, she wrote, "Carter Nursing Scholarship Fund, dedicated in honor of Lori Carter. For those who show compassion first, credentials second." She signed it without hesitation, then sealed it in an unmarked envelope. Anonymous, the way real kindness should be. Outside, the sky shifted from gold to violet. The new tree cast a thin shadow across the snow. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened the door, she saw a boy, maybe 7, bundled in a coat 2 sizes too big, a red scarf trailing behind him. It took her a moment to recognize him. The same child from the church drive, the one who had handed her the candy cane weeks ago. "Miss Elaine?" he asked, shyly holding out an envelope. "My mom said to give you this, for the presents and the food at Christmas." Elaine crouched down, accepting it carefully. "Thank you, sweetheart. Tell your mom it meant more than she knows." He grinned, then added, "She said you make people feel like home." Elaine's chest tightened, warmth spreading quietly through her. "That's a very nice thing to say." He nodded once, serious, before running off down the sidewalk, boots splashing through the slush. Elaine closed the door, turning the envelope over in her hands. Inside was a crayon drawing, crooked but full of heart. A small brown house, a woman smiling in the window, a tree growing outside with tiny red leaves. She hung it on her refrigerator beside an old photo of Mark and a newer one of Rhonda at the church. For the first time, the contrast didn't sting. It balanced. As twilight deepened, she stepped out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, the sky pale with the first hint of stars. The maple sapling stood tall in the yard, the soil around it dark and rich. She whispered into the cold, "No more empty tables." Behind her, the house glowed warmly, every lamp, every photograph, every trace of her life reflected back something whole. The wind stirred, brushing her hair, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a nearby house. Elaine smiled, her eyes soft but certain. Then, inside, the phone buzzed once. A text from David. "David, You'll get a copy of the finalized documents tomorrow. Everything's airtight now. She replied with 2 words. Elaine. So am I. But as she turned back toward the house, her gaze caught on the street. A dark car idling, quietly at the corner, headlights off. She stood there for a long moment, the chill crawling up her arms. Then she whispered to herself, steady and certain, "Whatever's left, they can't touch it," and went inside, locking the door. The snow returned that evening, quiet, deliberate, falling in slow spirals that softened everything it touched. Elaine stood by the window, watching it gather on the railing of her porch, each flake catching the porch light before vanishing into white. The house was warm, the kind of warmth that came not from the thermostat but from ownership. Every lamp lit because she wanted it, every sound her own. The car that had idled at the corner earlier was gone. In its place, stillness. On the kitchen table, she'd set one place: a plate, a folded linen napkin, a single wine glass. Across from it sat a candle, the wick unlit. She took the box of matches from the drawer, struck one, and watched it bloom. The first candle she lit was small, golden. "For Mark," she said softly. "For the years we shared and the ones I had to finish." Then she lit the second, its flame taller, steadier. "And this one," she whispered, "for me." The radio played low in the background, an old standard she half remembered from her nursing days, something about silver bells and coming home. Elaine hummed along as she served herself a simple dinner: roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, and a small roll she'd baked from the dough that had risen that morning. The rhythm of her movements was gentle, practiced: plate, glass, chair. She sat, cut her first bite, and smiled. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't victory. It was peace, the kind that asked for nothing but presence. Halfway through her meal, a knock sounded at the door. Elaine turned, surprised, then laughed softly to herself. There was only one person who knocked that way. 2 quick taps, then a pause, then one more for good measure. When she opened the door, Rhonda stood on the porch, bundled in her oversized red scarf, cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried a wicker basket wrapped in cellophane and tied with a green ribbon. "Don't tell me you cooked again," Elaine said, grinning. "Not cooked," Rhonda replied, stepping inside. "Gifted, from the church. Mostly me, but I let the others take credit." Elaine helped her with her coat and led her to the kitchen. Rhonda placed the basket on the counter. Fresh cider, a loaf of cranberry bread, 2 jars of homemade jam, and a note from one of the church kids that said, "Thank you for helping Santa this year." "Sit," Elaine said, pulling out a chair. "You're not leaving without cider." Rhonda laughed. "You sound like me now. I'm a bad influence." They sat together at the table, the candles flickering between them. Rhonda poured cider into the glasses Elaine had set, the liquid catching the light like amber. "Well, would you look at that?" Rhonda said softly. "You set 2 places after all?" Elaine smiled, a warmth settling in her chest. "Guess I knew you'd show up." They clinked glasses, the soft sound like punctuation at the end of a long sentence neither of them needed to finish. For a while they talked, about nothing and everything. The weather, the new tree in the yard, the scholarship fund Rhonda had promised not to tell anyone about, but had clearly told at least 2 people. Elaine didn't mind. The secret wasn't about hiding. It was about giving quietly. At one point, Rhonda stood and walked to the window. "Snow's coming down good again," she said. "Perfect way to end a long story." Elaine joined her. Outside, the yard glowed silver under the porch light. The maple sapling swayed slightly in the wind, its roots hidden but sure. "It's strange," Elaine said. "All my life, I thought peace meant having everyone around the table. Turns out peace was the table itself. and choosing who sits at it. Rhonda nodded. You built something real, Elaine. Took the ashes and made bricks out of them. Elaine laughed quietly. That's one way to say it. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the snow deepen. After a while, Rhonda gathered her things. I'll leave you to your evening. Don't eat that whole bread loaf without me, you hear? I'll freeze half, Elaine promised. When the door closed behind her, the house fell still again, not lonely, but full. Elaine turned back to the table. The candles burned low, their light softening the edges of everything. She sat, finished her wine, and leaned back in her chair, humming along to the radio again. Through the window, flakes of snow drifted down over the maple tree. Its thin branches caught the light, trembling but alive. Elaine reached over and added one more log to the fire, the sound of it cracking softly. Then she whispered the final line of her story to the empty room, to the warmth, to herself. They left me out once, but I wrote myself back in forever. The firelight flickered against her face, and for the first time in years, Elaine Carter looked not like someone rebuilding, but someone complete. Outside, the snow kept falling, endless, forgiving, and new.